Gentlemen, good evening and welcome to the Grand Théâtre for another Samedi au Théâtre, Saturdays at the theatre. Tonight is a special night because it's a premiere. We do love a good old premiere at the theatre. It's the first time that we're collaborating with the Fondation des Jeunes, Scientifiques Luxembourg. And I'm delighted that we have got an exciting exchange for you. So the topic is the dialogue, the connection and collaboration between science and art. And we might often think of those two disciplines as quite separate, and yet they're obviously intrinsically linked. If we're looking at topics such as artificial intelligence, the augmented body, augmented reality, climate change, technologic robotics, all of these are, of course, scientific topics, but they're also urgent topics of today, and as artists often tackle those topics in their work. So they are linked, and they're not necessarily a new thing. You know, back in the 60s already, with the creation of associations like the IRCAM in France, which specialized in the relationship between contemporary music and technological advances, or the exhibition in Germany. Here I need to look at my notes. That was the Art Electronica that was created already in 1979. But it is true that it is in the last decade that the relationship between the arts and science has really taken another dimension, and the two have gotten a lot closer, and we are delighted tonight to celebrate the hybridity between those forms. And we've got four amazing people who are going to share that. But first of all, I'm delighted to welcome Susanna with us.
Thank you so much.
So welcome for this first collaboration with you for the Jeunes Scientifiques and the Théâtres de la Ville.
Thank you. Yes, so my name is Susanna Young and I'm the director of the Fondation Jeunes Scientifiques Luxembourg. So I would like to introduce briefly our organization. So the Foundation aims to promote science among young people aged between 11 and 21. And for that purpose, we are organizing several extracurricular platforms. So I won't name it all, but the main one is the National Jonk Fuerscher Contest, so the National Young Scientist Competition, which is directly related to Science Next. So Science Next is a training program that support our young Fuerscher, our young scientists, in the process of developing a scientific project, and so throughout the school year. So with supervision, advices, but also workshops, coaching, conferences, roundtables. So I'm really thrilled to be able to organizing an event like this. The most prominent art organization, the Théâtres de la Ville de Luxembourg. And I can see some of our young Fuerscher here, and also theater audience all together. It's beautiful. So thank you.
So Susanna, what's in store? So if I've understood rightly, so we've got two different dialogues between every time a researcher, a scientist, and an artist. Would you like to maybe, so we start introducing our panel?
Yeah, so we tried to make binomes at first, so we decided that Camilla Hurst, one of our brilliant former young Fuerscherin, will be with Frieda Gerson, one of your artists, and Dr. Schockmel will be with Léa Tirabasso tonight. So.
Okay, so shall we kindly invite you to join us on stage? A few words on Frieda Gerson. She was born in San Francisco and arrived in Europe at the age of 18. She very quickly trained in many different theatrical forms: circus, physical theater, expression, masks theater, and she has really created a piece in 2022 that had its first residence here at the Talent Lab at the Théâtres de la Ville, called Parasite. And I'm sure in her dialogue she will talk about it more specifically, but you can already see that at the origin is a condition called the toxoplasmosis, and it is an investigation and research into obviously the functioning of the brain and all different manifestations of such parasites. So the link to science is clear, and so she will be in dialogue with...
So with Camilla Hurst, as I already mentioned, she is one of our former Jonk Fuerscher. So Camilla Hurst grew up in Luxembourg, and beside her studies at the European School Luxembourg 1, she developed several extracurricular scientific projects, so with environmental science topics. And she presented her different findings in the National Jonk Fuerscher contest for 5 years in a row. And as a result, she could participate in international competition and expo sciences. So during this international competition, she won the first prize at CASTIC in Shanghai. She also awarded of the 4th prize at the largest world competition for young scientists, InterLICEF in Los Angeles. And she also received the Georges Charpak Medal during your participation in European Expo Toulouse, and also participated in prestigious programs such as London International Youth Science Forum and the renowned Summer Science, so the International Summer Science and Weizmann Institute in Israel. So, yeah, a great profile.
We're looking forward to your conversation very much. And then the second dialogue will take place between dancer and choreographer Léa Tirabasso. Léa was trained originally at the London Contemporary Dance School, and already since 2012 started developing her own projects, among which we might cite works such as Love Me Tender or Simone in 2013, Toys in 2017. Her most recent production, Starving Dingoes, was created as part of the End of Creation residency in Annonay and premiered here at the Grand Théâtre in December 2021. But it is really for her piece, The Ephemeral Life of an Octopus, that not only brought her really to international recognition, as it was selected for the prestigious Area Waves platform in 2020, but it's also, I think, the production that really, I think, brought another level to the relationship between research, science, and the arts, as she tackled the topic of the evolution of cancerous cells in that production, and through really deep research and conversations with obviously cancer patients, but also different members from the medical profession, particularly specializing in cancer, but also general practitioners. That research really influenced her work. So we are really looking forward to hear what you will be talking to with.
So Dr. Schockmel, so already well known in the context of the COVID-19 pandemic, where he was a great advisor. So Dr. Schockmel is a board-certified specialist specializing in infectious disease. He devoted an extensive part of his research to the study of RNA viruses at the University of Oxford and Geneva. So at Geneva University Hospital, he co-developed an ultra-sensitive assay for the detection of HIV RNA in plasma that became the international standard for the management of antiviral therapy in HIV-infected individuals. Currently, he is an infectious disease consultant at Robert Schuman Hospitals, and is also an expert at the European Medicine Agency. Voilà.
So there we have it. So now we give the floor to you. Our first conversation, Camilla and Frieda. Take it away and enjoy, all of you.
Enjoy.
Thank you.
Great, Thank you for the introduction. So today I'm going to start off by presenting a project I carried out for the Jonk Fuerscher National Contest, which was investigating the role of materials and surfaces in the transmission of bacteria. So whilst the coronavirus pandemic was really catastrophic in many ways, I'd like to suggest one potential positive outcome, and that's that it's highlighted the importance of viral transmission. So whilst the pandemic has come and gone and we're picking up life as usual, the problem of disease transmission is one that we still need to tackle, and this is due to the rise of antibacterial resistance. So antibacterial resistance is when bacteria show the ability to adapt to new antimicrobial treatments, and this is in part due to the excessive or large amount of use of antibiotics in our society. I was surprised to learn that, for example, antibiotics are readily used in the food industry because it makes animals such as pigs and cows very fat very quickly. But this unregulated use has really big effects for our lives. For example, it's estimated that it can cause as many as 700,000 deaths per year due to antibacterial resistance. So it's a current issue, but it's also a growing issue, as it's forecasted to cause as many as 10 million deaths by 2050. So whilst these numbers are clearly shocking, I'd like to talk about how materials can actually play a key role in hopefully combating this problem. So I'm not talking about the transmission of bacteria via aerosol particulates, but actually via a fomite surface. So this is when you touch a contaminated surface, or you yourself contaminate that surface, and then someone else touches the same surface and transmits the bacteria in that way. The mechanisms by which this actually happens can be quite complex. And for example, one method of bacterial transmission that's actually quite impressive is a handbag, which is left on the floor in many different locations and then put on a tabletop. And so bacteria that you wouldn't normally be in contact with can be spread through this surface. So what I wanted to understand was which surface do we actually need to be particularly cautious about? So where in public places are bacterial levels the highest? And secondly, how can we combat this by hopefully trying to use different types of materials that naturally reduce the bacteria, so have a natural self-cleaning mechanism? And does this exist? And then finally, the third question was, if this does exist, what is the scientific process that causes this behavior? So as I said, I did this project as an extracurricular science project, which was in collaboration with the LIST, the Luxembourg Institute of Science and Technology. And we tried to test these different bacterial phenomena in my school. So whilst this was just in a controlled environment, it is representative for other public locations, such as hospitals, care homes, but also public transport, where we all touch the same button or surface. So which surface do you think would be the most contaminated in my school? If it's maybe in the bathrooms, well, that was actually the cleanest surface of all the ones that I tested. The most contaminated surface was the banister, the door handles, and tabletops. And so this result was initially quite surprising because we tend to think of these surfaces as being clean. But it was actually on these surfaces which had the highest levels of bacteria present that potentially harmful bacteria was identified. For example, on the banister that you can see in the image, one bacteria which could provoke urinary tract infections was identified, or another which could cause even meningitis or gonorrhea. So these are clearly quite surprising results to find present in a school in Luxembourg. But as I said, it also is representative for other public locations. So how can we reduce the bacteria on these surfaces? We could just clean them more frequently. We could try and change the design of these surfaces to reduce the transmission. But wouldn't it be great if the material itself had self-cleaning properties? So to be able to test whether this was true, I carried out different tests on a range of material classes to try and see how long bacteria survived on the different surfaces. So here in the image, you can see the bacterial colony count present on different types of materials after different amounts of time. So there were different types of woods with paulownia, oak, pine, and beech, a metal, copper, and then a plastic surface. So what's an immediately surprising result is that whilst we tend to think of plastic as being a clean surface, it was the plastic material which actually harbored the bacteria for the longest periods of time. And so you can see it was almost present for up to almost 11 hours. So whilst we may think that it's an easy surface to clean, in reality it's very prone to scratches and indentations. So we shouldn't be overusing plastic if we can choose other materials. The woods performed in general quite well, although another interesting result is that the beech wood actually had bacteria present for longer periods of time. And this was suggested to be due to actually a coating on the material. So I had bought a beech chopping board to test this, and the chopping board actually had a coating on it. And so it was clearly a polymeric coating, which was giving it similar properties to the plastic material. Both pine and copper were the best performing material and reduced almost all the bacteria in just 15 minutes. So the antibacterial properties of copper are actually quite well known in the research environment, and there are different suggested mechanisms to why this might actually be happening. Although at the time, what was quite an interesting result was that pine was so good and such a good antibacterial material. This then led to further research to try and understand what was making pine antibacterial. So the first thought was that it's actually just absorbing the bacteria very well inside the material. But actually, the paulownia wood was found to have a higher absorption rate. So then it asked the question, well, is there a chemical property inside of the wood which is killing off the bacteria? So in order to test this, I performed different extracts of pine in both water and ethanol. And what you can see in this graph is that the amount of bacteria was actually reduced over time in the pine extract from ethanol, showing that there's a chemical response that was also killing off the bacteria. Then, by performing high-performance liquid chromatography, this is a technique that allows us to identify different chemicals present in a solution. So in black, you can see the pine extract from ethanol, and in red, you see the pine extract from water. So the different amount of peaks in the graph are here to show the different amounts of chemical compounds present. So you can see there are more compounds present in the pine extract from ethanol, and the largest peak represents the most abundant chemical, which was identified as hydroxypinoresinol. What's interesting about hydroxypinoresinol is that it's found in resin of a tree. So when a tree is cut, resin tends to seep to the bark, and this is part of the natural defensive mechanism of the tree. So whilst we can't be sure that it's this chemical that's leading to antibacterial properties, it does make sense that chemicals that are part of the natural defensive mechanisms of the tree could have antibacterial properties. So to briefly summarize all the things we've seen, we saw that antibacterial resistance is a growing issue that we really need to target and start finding alternative ways of reducing bacteria. And if we start thinking about the intrinsic properties of material, we can start selecting materials that have natural antibacterial properties to use them in surfaces that are touched very frequently in everyday life in public settings. And we also saw that materials such as pine wood can naturally reduce the bacteria. So we should start using this material more rather than the excess use of plastic materials that we tend to use. So for example, as I said, in buttons and railings on public transport, but also door handles and banisters, we should promote pine wood which is uncoated, to allow the bacteria to be in contact with the mechanisms of the natural material that kills off the bacteria. But we can also start implementing this in our everyday life. For example, next time you need to buy a chopping board, go for a pine one rather than a plastic one. And so we've seen that there is a chemical response which is killing off the bacteria. And whilst we can't really be sure what exactly it is, it highlights how complex the natural world is and how materials can have different chemicals present in them to kill off bacteria. So just to finish off, hopefully to inspire further research in this field, there's a lot of future potential work to create antibacterial surfaces. So clearly we can't use woods for all sorts of surfaces, and so in some cases we need different mechanical properties depending on the design restrictions. So we can start thinking about creating composites or polymers or other materials like aluminium metals and engineer them to have an antibacterial coating. So here I have different suggestions. One is looking at polymer networks where you can combine the mechanical and the antibacterial properties of polymer. Another is looking at coating, so either polymer coating or here an aluminium coating where you start engineering the material in different ways. Just of note, before I pass on, you can see how diagrams are used in different ways to express science, and I'll come back to this point later when I talk about how art impacts science.
Thank you, Camilla. So Tom already introduced Parasite a bit. It's a hybrid performance in which we transpose scientific material, much like what Camilla was discussing, through circus, theater, and dance. And so I thought to start to give you an idea of what the show looks like, I'm going to share the teaser with you.
Ouh! Parasite! Ouh! Ainsi, le parasite modifie le corps et l'esprit de son hôte afin d'assurer sa propre survie. Toxo-infecte le rat.
Comment fait-on pour vivre seul? Comment fait-on pour vivre à deux? Comment fait-on pour être heureux sans se casser la gueule.
So parasites can be viruses, bacteria, fungi, or other organisms. Some of my favorite parasites are the ones that we live with every day, and often without knowing. For example, the influenza virus, the flu. Within 2 days of a flu infection, we humans are contagious while not yet showing any symptoms. Research shows that it's exactly within the space of these 2 days that we humans are twice as sociable as usual. Even the introverts suddenly want to be around others. And this isn't an accident. This is called in science evolutionary advantage, because more socialization means that the flu has a greater opportunity to spread. So we are the hosts, and this is mind control. Another parasite that I love is toxoplasmosis. Or toxoplasmosis is the disease. It's caused by the parasite Toxoplasma gondii, a single-celled creature that infects rodents such as rats and mice, so that it can later complete its life cycle in cats. Infection with T. gondii alters the rodent's behavior, forcing the host to conform to the parasite's needs. The rat's instinct disappears. Infected rats show a reduction in their innate aversion to cat odors, and they sometimes even become attracted to the odor of their predators. So we could call this a parasite-induced suicide. What's interesting is that toxoplasmosis has long been considered harmless in healthy adults. Yet recent studies link toxoplasmosis to schizophrenia and bipolar disorder, as well as suicide. One significant study showed that for rodents infected with T. gondii, antiparasite medication is equally as effective as antipsychosis medication in preventing the rodent's suicidal behavior changes. These are some of the creatures that led me to wonder, who are our invisible puppet masters, and what strings are they pulling? How can we know if what we want is really what we want, or if it's simply what a parasite wants us to want? And if what I desire does not truly belong to me, what do I have left? The parasite researcher Shelley Adamo says, if the mind is a machine, then anything can control it. Anything, that is, that understands the code and has access to the machinery. Inspired by John Calhoun's studies on rodent socialization, the artists in the show Parasite are confined to the stage, observed by the audience like creatures under a microscope. We were interested in transposing the scientific material both literally and metaphorically. In the literal sense, we watched many, many videos of parasites and host and studied their movements as well as their rhythms, as well as the transmission, the contagion, of parasite from host to host. So I'd like to share a longer video of our work. This is an excerpt of a choreography that was inspired mostly by parasitic nematodes. And then afterwards, there's a scene based on the parasitic fungus cordyceps.
Peu d'espèces sur notre planète ont autant de succès que les fourmis. Il peut y avoir jusqu'à 80 millions d'individus vivant sur un seul hectare, répartis en colonies soigneusement organisées. Pendant ce temps, les champignons et les moisissures se précipitent pour décomposer la matière morte sur le terreau de la forêt. Ils se propagent en déchargeant des spores, jusqu'à 30 000 par seconde. Il suffit qu'une seule de ces spores atterrisse et puisse prendre racine pour coloniser toute une nouvelle zone. Mais tous les champignons ne se nourrissent pas des morts. Il y a quelques jours, une spore a atterri sur une fourmi. Et depuis, elle agit bizarrement. Un réseau de racines a infiltré ses muscles. Tel un marionnettiste tirant sur les cordes, Cordyceps, un champignon parasitoïde, a pris possession du corps de cette fourmi. Les fourmis parasitées, quand elles sont découvertes par d'autres fourmis saines, sont rapidement rejetées et éloignées de la colonie afin d'éviter la propagation d'une pandémie. Parasitoïde. Parce qu'il y a un acte final pour lequel la fourmi infectée n'a pas le choix. Manipulée par son parasite, elle grimpe jusqu'à trouver un endroit où s'accrocher à la végétation et mourir. Mourir?
Oui. Là.
So that gives you a bit of an idea of the different ways that we transposed our research on stage, both through movement and through text. The ways that we researched the absurdity of it as well. We also wanted to transpose the effects of parasite manipulation on a more metaphorical level. And to do this, we looked specifically at how Toxoplasma gondii changes the predator-prey relationship between the cat and the rat. And we asked ourselves, what would this mean in the context of a human relationship, to be attracted by one's predator? So this was also our queer feminist perspective and a commentary on patriarchy, both as mind control and parasite manipulation, which was also an important part of the subtext of the show. We also played with how to decenter the human from the retelling of the story, to shift this perspective, to see parasites within the context of a larger ecosystem, in which we humans are perhaps not always the protagonists. Our research and deconstruction of the parasite-host relationship, as well as the parasite-scientist relationship, led us to explore also the performer-audience relationship. This was one more transposition of the scientific material, to play with the idea of who was studying who and who was infecting who. And so the show Parasite also became a parasite, infecting the audience with our own ideas and research. And with that, I'd like to pass it back to Camilla.
Thank you. So that was really interesting to see how a scientific concept can really be transposed into an artistic setting. And so I'd like to quickly talk about the reverse cycle. So how art has inspired or affected some of the research that I've done so far, but also the idea and the concept of transmission. So not just a transmission of bacteria, but a transmission of ideas. And that's something which I've really experienced, especially with this extracurricular science project. So as was said in the introduction, I presented this project at the National Context Jonk Fuerscher, and I was lucky enough to be able to travel internationally to different competitions and events to present this project. And this gave a really big opportunity to be present and experience new cultures and new people and transmit ideas in this way. So I'd briefly like to go through some of the different experiences that I was able to go to. So the first one is the Weizmann Institute in Israel. And what was really impressive with this experience is that it brought scientists from all around the world, young scientists, to work on a single project together collaboratively. So here you can see at the bottom me with my team. And what's really impressive is that we were all from a different continent. So myself, Europe, Australia, we had someone from South Korea, and then America. And so the common language becomes science. And so the way we communicate science was our way of being able to transmit ideas. And I think that's a connection that we can make between the scientific and artistic world, is that we're both trying to communicate a concept to an audience and trying to find different ways to communicate that concept. Another thing to say was that we were in a setting which was completely foreign to us, that most of us had never been to Israel before. So being in a completely foreign environment, but being able to communicate via ideas of science was something which was really highlighted in this experience. And the presence of a foreign culture was highlighted even more when I went to CASTIC in Shanghai. And what I'd like to highlight here was the importance of visual arts in science. So I finished off my previous talk about saying how art is really important in highlighting concepts. So in a different culture, when even just written text is very difficult to read, for example, for most people here, maybe reading the signpost will be almost impossible. So using diagrams, videos, images in science is really important to transmit ideas in clear ways. And that's something which was further emphasized in Los Angeles at Intel ISEF, when we were able to spend time together, different people from around the world, and it highlighted the importance of having a good poster or a good schematic video to express your scientific text. So I think actually science and art can be interconnected in many different ways. Not only does science influence the artistic world, but also the artistic world is used to express science and to communicate science. And in both forms, both science and art are a way to communicate to society, to better society. So with that, thank you for listening.
Thank you. I think I just want to jump back on what you just said as a bridge, because tonight is about bridges. And I think that one of the thing we have in common, artists and scientists, is imagination. You have to start with a crazy idea, and you have to look for a way to reach it, embody it, find it, or find something else. So I think imagination is definitely something we share. And to one of my challenges when working with science was how not to picture science, how to make a work that doesn't represent a scientific concept, but how do I transform what I understand of a scientific concept into something else. So transformation, I think, is key as well. It's not just showing, presenting, but it's about transforming, digesting. Hello, everyone. My name is Léa, and tonight we're going to talk about my latest piece, Starving Dingoes, and its scientific notions, inspirations. I'm going to quickly introduce it before I share a short extract of it. So there are 4 biggest notions that are scientific, but that are also dramaturgical and choreographical and physical. So those notions were really explored with our bodies as well. The first notion is chaos. I was myself diagnosed with cancer 6 years ago, and I had to make a piece about my experience, my emotional experience, my physical experience, my spiritual experience. And for it, I had to understand what cancer was. And that's how I started collaborating with scientists. So chaos was something that really came back to me when people were talking to me about cancer, that they are chaotic creatures, they are out of control. So chaos is one thing. The other thing is dysfunction. Cell dysfunction. And of course, the cell dysfunction, and you can extrapolate it to societal dysfunction, behavioral dysfunction, political dysfunction, ecological dysfunction. So we extrapolated this. Physical dysfunction. Our third notion, is sacrifice. The notion of sacrifice. When something dysfunctions, what do we do with it? Do we kill it? Do we repair it? Do we destroy it? Do we cure it? And what if it doesn't cure? What do we do with it? Do we surrender to mortality? And there is a 4th notion, which is the consciousness of mortality and our primal fears. That's it. So I'm going to share an extract, and then we'll talk about the work more specifically and more scientifically. Hang on. Oh yes. This is the video. Yes. Great. So this is the video. So quickly, the scientific concept, phenomena that was at the center for starving dingoes is the apoptosis, which we will talk about more in detail in a minute. Someone described it to me as a healthy cell knows how to kill itself, but an unhealthy cell has lost its ability to commit suicide. And so I wonder, what do the other cells then do around an unhealthy cell? Can't they just kill it? And that's what we did on stage. So Starving Dingoes was about killing the dysfunctional elements so that the body would survive.
Okay, so is my, yes, my device seems to be working. I'll start with the ballet scene that we all could look at. First there's the killing. A person gets killed because the group considers him to be dysfunctional. Distress. You probably observed that everyone is in distress, those who kill and the person who gets killed. There's a ritual. The killing does not reflect random behavior, but follows a predefined ritual, accepted by all. Goodbye. The ritual includes a time for goodbye before the killing. While every member of the group participates in the goodbye, one female in particular is clinging to the victim till the very end. Jesus-like figure. The tall male person who gets killed seems to me a Jesus-like figure, both because of his physical appearance and because of his behavior. He accepts his inexorable fate and does not resist it. As to Jesus himself, Jesus Christ accepted his death on the cross in all humility, trusting in the wisdom of the Holy Father. Similarly, the Jesus-like figure in the ballet provides no resistance and is an acceptance of himself being killed. Sacrifice. Both Jesus and the Jesus-like figure accept being sacrificed, trusting their sacrifice to serve the greater good of mankind and of the in-group, respectively. According to Christian theology, Jesus lived a life without sin. This made it possible for Jesus to deliver mankind from sin by sacrificing himself on the cross. His self-sacrifice was an act of love whose purpose was the redemption of sin for the salvation of mankind. The Rite of Spring, Le Sacre du Printemps. Composer Igor Stravinsky's ballet also deals with sacrifice. The Rite of Spring evokes a pagan ceremony in which a young virgin is sacrificed to the fertility god, the god of spring. A tribe gathers on the barren Russian steppe in an adoration of the death. The young virgin dances herself to death. Her sacrifice causes the return of spring and the renewal of the earth. She dies for the greater good of the tribe. Now, if we go down to cell biology on a smaller microscopic level, Léa, you said, how do healthy cells react to a dysfunctional cell? If that dysfunctional cell becomes a threat to themselves and to the body as a whole. A human being is a multicellular organism composed of trillions of cells. Each of these cells has a specific function to fulfill. The human organism is highly organized, and there's a strict hierarchy to ensure the survival of the organism. Here are a few examples to illustrate this point. Take an animal whose leg is caught in a trap. That animal might bite off the trapped leg in order to escape, free itself. Within an organism, there is a stress response. Stress response is a higher order program that overrides all other cellular programs to mobilize a maximum of energy for a fight or flight response. Then there is the centralization of blood flow. In case of major blood loss, the centralization of blood flow diverts the blood flow to where it is most needed, away from the limbs, arms and legs, to the vital organs such as the heart and the lung. Immune surveillance. The immune system is constantly patrolling the body for signs of invasive disease, caused either by cancer or by an infectious pathogen. If invasive disease is detected, the immune system will kill cells that represent a threat to the body's survival. The immune system will kill cancer cells because they are proliferating at the expense of other tissues, and kill infected cells because they allow infectious pathogens to spread within the body. Immune escape mechanisms. For the immune surveillance to be successful, dysfunctional cells need to display specific features that are recognizable to the immune system. However, in the course of evolution, both cancer cells and infectious pathogens have developed immune escape mechanisms to pass under the radar of the body's scrutiny and make it more difficult for the immune system to fight them. Killing of dysfunctional cells through apoptosis. One way to kill dysfunctional cells is through apoptosis. Apoptosis is a form of regulated cell death that exists in a multicellular organism. Apoptosis is a process that empowers a cell to commit suicide. It is a suicide switch within the cell. Apoptosis is a highly regulated and controlled process comparable to a ritual. Normally, apoptosis is used to rid the body of cells that are dysfunctional or that have been damaged beyond repair. It can be compared to the falling off of leaves from a tree, except that it is an active process. Thus, the average adult loses between 50 and 70 billion cells each day due to apoptosis. Apoptosis, regulated cell death, can be initiated in one of two ways. Either a cell kills itself in response to dysfunction or injury, or cells of the immune system turn on the suicide switch in a dysfunctional cell, causing that cell to kill itself. In this way, cells of the immune system can use apoptosis to kill cancer cells or infected cells. Cancer cells, though, may block apoptosis, thus helping the tumors to thrive and resist attacks by the immune system. Certain cancer cells may even become immortal. Immortal cells can divide an unlimited number of times in a laboratory cell culture as long as the appropriate culture conditions are being met. HeLa cells are an example of an immortalized cell line. They are named after a young Afro-American woman, Mrs. Henrietta Lacks, mother of 5 children, who died young, at the age of 31. Her death occurred in 1951. Mrs. Lacks died from cervical cancer caused by a virus named HPV. However, today, 70 years after her death, her cancer cells continue to divide and are used in scientific research laboratories all over the world. The HeLa cell line is the oldest and most commonly used human cell line. What makes HeLa cells immortal? HeLa cells possess a particular molecular feature that is bestowed onto them by the virus they are infected with. In infected cancer cells, that molecular feature protects each end of the chromosomes from DNA damage during cell division. The result is unlimited cell division and immortality. The virus that caused the cervical cancer Mrs. Lacks died from is named HPV, human papilloma virus. Nowadays, there's a vaccine available against HPV, and this vaccine can prevent cervical cancer. Had Mrs. Lacks been vaccinated against HPV, she probably would not have died from cervical cancer. The human papilloma virus can cause cancer. Other examples of cancer-causing viruses are the hepatitis B and hepatitis C viruses associated with liver cancer, the HTLV1 retrovirus associated with a certain type of leukemia, and the Epstein-Barr virus associated with various types of cancers. cancers have a large toolbox when it comes to growth and survival. One of their tools that has already been mentioned is their capacity for blocking regulated cell death, apoptosis. Blocking apoptosis prevents cancer cells from committing suicide in response to signals received from the immune system. Another protective tool of cancer cells I would like to introduce now is their capacity for forming new blood vessels, a process named angiogenesis. Compare cancer to an invading army. Each army depends on supplies for the success of its operations, supplies of weapons, ammunition, fuel, artillery, food. In the case of cancer, blood supply is crucial for its growth, since blood provides all the nutrients and oxygen that cancer cells need. The formation of new blood vessels, angiogenesis, plays a critical role in the growth of cancer because solid tumors need an increased blood supply if they are to grow beyond a few millimeters in size. Tumors can cause this additional blood supply to form by producing chemical signals that stimulate angiogenesis, the formation of new blood vessels. Generally speaking, threats exist at different levels within groups of people, families, larger communities, whole nations, or even in the relationship between the planet Earth and the human species, since the human species has become a threat to life on Earth. In a human society, the response to threat can involve different strategies, whose common purpose is to neutralize dysfunctional individuals, thus preventing them from causing harm. A threat response can focus on repair, providing support, treatment, placing an individual in custody or in prison, or in an extreme case, killing that person. The threat response also depends on the fact whether the person is compliant or not. Threats may occur on a physical, psychological, social, political, economic, and financial level, amongst others. Awareness of our own death. What does it mean to be aware that you are going to die, that you will get killed? All our instincts tell us to avoid death under any circumstances. Thus, the awareness of death fills us with terror and may cause existential anxiety. However, our existential anxiety can be tempered by the bonds we have with the persons close to us, a sense of belonging, the connection to our in-group, our worldview or religion, and to some degree, our sense of self-esteem. Dr. Elizabeth Kübler-Ross was a psychiatrist and a pioneer of studies on dying people. She found that when facing death, an individual often proceeds through 5 stages of grief. First, there is denial, then anger, followed by bargaining, depression, and finally acceptance. To conclude these considerations, I would say we are born out of stardust, the dust of stars, and when we die, we will return to the inorganic state that stardust represents. Thank you for your attention.
I think that one of the definition or understanding of cancer cells that sort of really fed also the work was that it is a disease that is full of life, and this irony, the fact that it's a cell that does not want to die, is very, fucked up. I don't know, there's no other word to say it. It's completely crazy. Something that's killing you doesn't want to die. And so this friction was really something that we explored. I think, because we've extrapolated to ecology, the earth, there's also a definition of cancer that I really liked. It's an artist called Brian Lobel. He's based in London, and he says he's a cancer artist. He also had cancer when he was 19, and then has been working on this concept ever since. And he says that, probably lots of people say that, but I heard him from him, that cancer is like capitalism. It spreads. It spreads everywhere, and it colonizes every parts of your body. So there's also, this aspect of cancer that it's vicious and it goes everywhere. Because we talked about the link between science and art, I think that there's also something that I've understood later in the process of Starving Dingoes. We talked about Jesus, we talked about the sacrifice figure, and I think that in a way, Starving Dingo is also a mise en abîme of the representation of the sacrifice of the artist on the altar of their industry sometimes. And I think, that's also an interpretation of the piece that I think is important to mention. Yeah, that's it. For us, I think.
No, but the two of you might also have a word to say.
Can I add something? When we had that conversation on the phone,
yes,
there was something very interesting we talked about. You said to me, you said something about, don't you think the body can't talk? And I think I said, but both of us are trying to get the body to speak. You remember that? That we try to have the body to speak with movement on a stage, with lighting and costumes and sound, but you as scientists as well. And I guess that's also a common point we have in trying to get the invisible to speak. Yeah.
I find the parallel between cancer and capitalism super interesting, especially as we mentioned Henrietta Lacks, because Henrietta Lacks, the scientist, just like the cancer, did not ask her permission to use her body. So she was a victim to both in the end.
Yes, so I didn't mention that because I didn't want to distract from the messages I wanted to get across, but now, since it has been mentioned, in those days, taking tissue from a person did not necessarily require informed consent. So Mrs. Lex was not asked whether she actually would agree that her cancer cells be used in the laboratory, and actually they are still being used nowadays, 70 years later. So I think that is what you wanted to allude to.
Yeah, I bet I forgot. I guess that gives us time for some questions, if any of you have some questions about collaborations, the need to build bridges between practices. Oh, maybe I'll add something then. I think that this works as well, like the work we do together, artists and scientists. There's another level, is that it raises awareness. And I think that is so important. It raises awareness of gynecological cancer. It raises awareness of viral infections. And there's another level that is very important. Of course, there's a collaboration, there are researches, there's an artistic work that's being shared, but there are also values, and somehow it's a public, how would you say? An awareness program, yeah.
Yeah, if I just add on some more similarities between the artistic world or developing a scientific project, something which I think we can also see in the extracts is that often performances are team efforts, it's collaborative. Even just creating a choreography is a very collaborative experience often. And something that I've been able to experience through the Jonk Fuerscher Foundation and starting work in science is how collaborative science is. And so also skills and experiences that you have in both spheres can really interconnect in terms of developing a project with other people, bouncing ideas off of other people, and trying to really get to an end goal, be it a performance or presenting your presentation. So there are a lot of similarities, and something which is worth exploring is how things that are successful in communication of an artistic performance, how we can use that in science to try and explain science to the public more effectively and more tangibly to people, really to raise awareness, as you were saying, that in both cases we're trying to communicate an idea. So how can we use both disciplines and combine them to communicate ideas as best as possible?
Are there any audience questions?
Yeah, the gentleman.
Yes, thank you for all these nice presentations and explanations. Maybe there is another bridge that you can, or another gap that you can close, bridging with art to science. Especially if you want to have a project, you need resources, you need materials, and you need humans, and you need money in the final end. So if you are planning for a project, you need to expose it to very often to some board, be it in industry or be it in official science. So you have to bring your ideas over to the people who are finally deciding whether you get the money or do not get the money. And I think maybe, I don't know if you were involved in that, to bring art or artful presentation of the project into that environment. How to bring over the idea, not too dry with just a spectra, explain spectra, but also to bring the idea over in a generally understandable way, because very often the people who are in economics or finances very often shied away from any science in their educational schedule before. So I think there is a very big gap very often. So I had it in industry. I saw that gap very often and had to bridge it. So did you have any similar experience to try to do that?
I think we always need money in the art. We're always asking for money, and we always need more money, and we're very good at working on a tight budget. So I think that's definitely something I resonate with.
So there are a few points I could say about that. Firstly, I think I could just highlight again the Fondation Jeunes, Scientifiques, which is really a stepping board for a lot of young scientists in Luxembourg. Some of the photos that I showed about being able to travel internationally, that's a really unique opportunity that allows young scientists to do in Luxembourg. And also the opportunity to have access to different labs and equipment was really key in carrying out my project. So for example, also the collaboration I did with LIST, the Luxembourg Institute of Science and Technology, was really key to be able to access a high-level scientific equipment to carry out some of the tests. On the point of presenting your project, I think this really hones the importance of being able to convey messages to different audiences. And so that's really capturing an idea and distilling it down to its basics and trying to then explain it in a way adapted to who you're talking to. So something which I think helped me learn how to hopefully do that a bit better was really being in foreign cultures where you don't speak the same language, or common references aren't the same. So you really have to then distill an idea to a core message, and sometimes that's done through images better or through videos better than anything else. So it's not sometimes just a photo of your experiment, but also an artistic expression, for example, of what we're doing. So, for example, relating back to the coronavirus pandemic, I think it helped a lot of people when we saw the image or the artistic impression of what the virus looked like with all the studs all the way around. And that really helped us think about, oh, this is how this thing is sticking onto other cells. So using imagery, now that we're really bridging science and art, really helps to convey concise information, specifically, as you said, when you're trying to get resources in and explaining it to people who won't know the technical terms when you say them. So that's something which definitely is important, I feel.
Does it work? Okay, it does. I had a question addressed to Ms. Hurst about her project she did for the Jonk Fuerscher. So she concluded that pine, like the pine wood and copper, would be the best for antibacteria. But which is the most cost effective, and which one can be implemented in schools or in public places? Because now that we have this information, don't we want to apply it to the real world? So which one would you recommend?
Thanks for the question. Yeah, that's a really good point. I think what's important to think about is the application that you're going through. So for example, on banisters, we do see some wooden banisters, so that sort of highlights that there's a techno-economic relationship between the material and the cost. But that's also a really interesting point that highlights, for example, about plastic, is that currently we don't really think about the emissions the material makes when we produce it. But maybe in a future world where there are carbon taxes, then the price of materials is going to completely change in producing specific materials. So specifically, I feel like for certain applications, pine wood would be potentially more cheap than using copper, but it also allows for more potential research that maybe you'd like to carry out, which is maybe developing coatings that you could spray on to existing materials to try and reduce cost of taking down an equipment and re-implementing it. So there's a lot of potential to develop, spray-on coatings or different types of coatings. There's often quite a difficult balance in making something in the lab and then trying to make it commercial and trying to make it cost-effective. But there are several positive signs for using pine in that it can be cost-effective and, as we saw, has this antibacterial property. I can't tell you specific numbers, unfortunately. I don't have them on the top of my head, but hopefully that answers your question. Any more questions? Oh, yeah.
Thanks. Yeah, thanks. I have a general question for any of you. I'd be curious to know if you know any examples of contributions by artists to the development of science.
It's often the other way around. It's often the other way around. I don't know everything, but
I do think that in terms of the development of science, that would mean scientific research, contributing to scientific research. I think what happens more is a translation of scientific concepts in an artistic way, so that these concepts become understandable to a general public. I think that's rather what's going on.
And I think probably technology might be where it happens, maybe. But I don't have any examples, really.
Yeah, for us, we were more interested in how to transpose, I would say, rather than trying to be scientists, which is not something that we are trained for.
Yeah, maybe to add on to that, I haven't got a specific name, but I have seen that there was, for example, a mathematical concept that was actually helped to be developed by a female scientist or mathematician who also liked to crochet, so to knit. And so in knitting in a specific way, she was able to display a sort of 3D model of what she was trying to represent. I've forgotten the name, unfortunately. Hopefully I've explained it correctly then, if you know it, more or less. I think from personal experience, what I can share is when you start breaking down, so I studied material science, and when you start breaking down materials into very simplified models, then using imagery is really helpful to get your head around what's happening at the atomic or molecular level, just because seeing something visually often helps to understand it in a mathematically or scientific way. So I suppose I could name myself, but no, definitely I feel that having an understanding of visualizing a model that you're making definitely helps in developing the science behind it, especially when you are working on something which you can't tangibly see, like materials at the atomic level.
There is actually a famous example. I mean, it's obvious that in science, scientists need to figure out their concepts, and so representation, graphic representation, imaging is very important. A famous example is the DNA, the double helix. Once they had figured out the double helix, it just wouldn't fit because there wasn't enough space within the cell nucleus in the cell. And only when they said, well, what if you take it and you twist it? Then it will take up, because otherwise it would be very long, that molecule. But obviously, if it is a spiral, then it becomes much shorter. And so they had a little model, and at some stage they just twisted it. And so they said, okay, that must be what is going on.
Yeah, in practice, it's sometimes hard to explain, but using imagery becomes another tool to understand a scientific concept. So it's hard to explain exactly when you need it, but in my studies in science and engineering, I realized that it's just an extension to other tools in the kit to be able to create something new or understand a problem.
Okay, maybe just one final contribution, one final question.
Yeah, thank you all for the interesting contributions. I'm still also kind of interested in the question that was asked before, but maybe I can ask it in a different way, because I'm very interested in this contrast between science and art as one thing that is logical and rational, and the other being like irrational or emotional, because clearly it's more similar than we might think. But also I'm interested in the idea that because the question about is there art that has inspired science really makes a lot more sense if you think of the fact that there's more science than just natural science, because there is a whole part of science that is also dedicated to studying the irrational sides of humanity and studying arts and studying how art happens. And so, yeah, maybe do you have any thoughts about that and like where science ends, or like what is science and what is art if we try not to separate them like that? Don't know if that's a clear question, but yeah, I'm really interested in the border between the two.
I mean, even if art doesn't directly inspire experimental research, art inspires the person who does research. And so basically, if, for example, you listen to a piece of music, there are different parts of your brains that will become active than if you read the scientific articles. So I do think that scientists, they are not only scientists, they are having many interests. And obviously, by having also interest in the arts and being inspired by the arts, that might actually favor, to some extent, a certain communication within the brain. For example, Einstein, they found that his brain was not particularly heavy or particularly big, but he had a lot of communication between the left and the right hemispheres of his brain. There was a lot of crosstalk there, and that was certainly something that was highly developed in his brain. I will have to leave, I'm very sorry.
I'm just going to say that quickly, but maybe that's, I don't know, I've never thought about that. But as dancers, you use your body, and you need to learn how to use your body. And so you need to know your muscles, you need to know the bones, you need to know the connections, you need to know... Is it a way to use science? Maybe. So yeah, I just question that in the way we use our bodies as tools. Maybe that's a continuation of some scientific knowledge. I don't know. Maybe.
So when composing Parasite, we watched a lot of nature documentaries. And one link between science and art that I observed in the nature documentary is that we used a little bit in the scene, the cordyceps scene that you all saw, is that the way that nature documentaries are narrated mimics a lot of horror movies. That they really over-dramatize the chase between a predator and a prey and all of these things, and it's made to keep the watcher interested. And so in these ways, I think science has based itself on art quite a lot.
Well, I would really like to say a huge thank you to all of you. I know Dr. Gérard Schockmel has an appointment across the bridge at the Philharmonie, so he had to leave us, but huge thanks to him, to Léa Tirabasso, Frieda Gerson, and Camilla Hurst. I think we all agree the fascinating exchanges, so many things in common, and at the end of the day, I think we're all trying to understand the world a little bit better. And to conclude, I'd like to just quote cosmologist Jean-Philippe Uzan, who at the opening of an exhibition, Le Rêve des Formes, answered to an interview with Télérama in 2017 that science is not an art form, but the results of a searcher have a poetic force. Art and science have in common to question the world and to make the invisible visible. Thank you all so much for coming tonight. Thanks to all of you. Have a lovely evening and see you again in March for the next Samedi au Théâtre. Thank you.